They called her kind. They called her generous. They called her a savior for the forgotten. But beneath the soft smile, behind the grandmotherly voice, under the garden in her quiet Sacramento backyard, lay the truth. This is the story of Dorothea Puente. And this is not fiction. This is real. In the quiet streets of Sacramento, California, during the 1980s, there was a small boarding house on F Street. It didn't look unusual. A simple 2-story home, a neat yard, flowers growing near the fence. Inside lived elderly men, disabled tenants, people with mental illness, people who had nowhere else to go. And at the center of it all was Dorothea Puente. She was in her late 50s, short, soft-spoken, gray hair styled neatly. To neighbors, she seemed like a saint. She fed the poor. She gave shelter to the homeless. She even worked with social workers and parole officers to house people no one else wanted. She looked like someone's grandmother, but appearances can be weapons. Dorothea was born in 1929. Her childhood was chaotic. Her parents were unstable. Her mother died when she was young. Her father reportedly struggled with alcoholism. By the time she was a teenager, Dorothea was already lying about her age, creating new identities, manipulating people. She learned early that sympathy could open doors, and that trust could be exploited. By the 1960s and 70s, she had already built a criminal history. Forgery, fraud, theft. She was known for targeting elderly men. She would charm them, gain their trust, and then steal their money. Sometimes she married them. Sometimes they mysteriously disappeared from her life. But she was always careful, always subtle, always patient. In the early 1980s, she began running her boarding house at 1426 F Street. Her tenants were vulnerable. Many were elderly, some were mentally disabled. Most received government assistance checks. And that's what Dorothea really wanted: their social security payments, their disability checks, their income. She would convince them to sign documents. She would offer to help manage their finances. She became their payee, their caretaker, their controller. And once she controlled their money, she controlled their lives. But soon, tenants began to disappear. One man moved out suddenly, she would say. Another found work elsewhere. Another went to visit family. Social workers sometimes asked questions, but Dorothea always had an answer, and she always smiled when she said it. In 1982, one tenant died of a drug overdose. Police were suspicious. Dorothea was arrested for poisoning him with sleeping pills, but the charges were reduced. She served only a short sentence. And then she returned to the boarding house, returned to the garden, returned to the vulnerable. The killings that followed were slow, calculated, quiet, sedatives, sleeping pills. She would overdose her tenants. When they became weak, when they could no longer resist, she finished the job. And then she buried them. In her backyard, under the soil, under the flowers. For years no one knew. Neighbors noticed odd behavior, late-night digging, heavy trash bags, but nothing concrete, nothing that screamed murder. Because who would suspect a grandmother? Who would suspect the woman who baked cookies for the neighborhood? Everything changed. In November 1988, a social worker reported one of her tenants missing, a man named Alfred Levin. Dorothea claimed he had gone to visit relatives, but the relatives said they hadn't seen him. Police decided to investigate. They came to the house. They searched the rooms. And then they stepped into the backyard. The first body was discovered near a freshly disturbed patch of earth. Then another, and another. 7 bodies were eventually found buried in that small yard, wrapped in blankets, shallow graves, just feet below where she had planted flowers. The smell of death had been sitting beneath that home for years. But here is the most chilling part. While police were excavating her yard, Dorothea was sitting calmly in a nearby cafe, chatting, drinking coffee, reading the newspaper. She had told officers she needed to get something to eat, and they let her go. She simply walked out, as bodies were being pulled from her garden. She was later found in Los Angeles, calm, composed, even friendly with the man she was staying with. When arrested, she reportedly said, "I'm innocent." She never showed fear. She never showed panic. Only irritation, as if the whole situation was an inconvenience. Her trial began in 1993. The courtroom was packed. The image of the killer grandma shocked America. Prosecutors described how she drugged her victims, how she forged their signatures, how she continued cashing their checks after they were dead, how she buried them like trash. Her defense argued lack of evidence for direct murder. They claimed the deaths were accidental overdoses. But the pattern was undeniable. The money trails, the forged documents, the bodies, the backyard. The jury deliberated for days. In the end, Dorothea Puente was convicted of 3 counts of murder, though investigators believed the true number of victims could be as high as 9, maybe more. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. She was 64 years old. Even behind bars, she remained calm, polite, almost charming. She gave interviews, she painted pictures, she sold artwork to collectors. Some people even wrote to her, fascinated by her. She denied being a monster. She claimed she was misunderstood. She claimed she cared for her tenants. But the garden told a different story. What makes this case so disturbing is not just the number of victims, it's the method, the manipulation. She didn't use violence in the traditional sense. She used trust. She used kindness as camouflage. Her victims were not random strangers. They were people who depended on her, people who trusted her, people who thought they were safe. Imagine sitting at her kitchen table, drinking tea, talking about your day, not knowing the person across from you has already decided your fate, not knowing the soil outside your window is your final destination. Dorothea Puente died in prison in 2011. She was 82 years old. She never fully confessed, never expressed real remorse, and the house on F Street still stands. The backyard has been cleaned, the graves removed, but the memory remains, because evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a grandmother with a gentle smile. This case changed how authorities handled vulnerable populations. It exposed gaps in social services. It revealed how easy it was for predators to exploit the elderly and disabled. And it reminded the world of something terrifying. The most dangerous predators are often the ones who appear harmless. Dorothea Puente didn't hunt in dark alleys. She didn't chase victims in the night. She waited. She smiled. She poisoned. And she buried. All while the world saw her as kind. And somewhere in Sacramento, under a quiet sky, there is a house that once held secrets beneath its garden. Secrets that whispered through the soil. Secrets that took years to uncover. Because sometimes the scariest stories happen in ordinary homes. And sometimes the dead are closer than anyone realizes. If you enjoyed this dark true story, there are more waiting in the shadows, because history is full of monsters, and not all of them look like monsters.